It's a fantasy contenders day for the Locked On NHL podcast, as Gil Martin will be pinch hitting for Jay Foster, and we are going to select our top 5 contenders on our fantasy team for the NHL this year. It's all coming up right after this.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. I am Hunter Hodes of Locked On Penguins, and pinch hitting for Jay Foster today is Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders. Gil, really appreciate you coming on for Jay as he had something come up. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So again, Gil, really appreciate you coming on. And we have a pretty unique show for today. So we are going to draft 5 teams to a mock fantasy team, 5 Stanley Cup contenders each. And once we pick a team, the other person can't pick that one for their team. And this should be fun. And we also want to know what you all think of our teams when this episode ends. So this should be fun. And I'm going to turn it over to you now. Who is your top team? I'm going to give you the top pick in this little mock fantasy draft.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's tough. There's a lot of contenders out there. You know what? I'm gonna stick conservative. A team that I think has been close over the last couple of years and should be a contender again. I'm gonna go with the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they're extremely well coached. They're built from the goal out. They don't give up a lot of goals, and I think if they're healthy, they'll find just enough offense to get the job done. I mean, injuries really hurt them in the playoffs last year. I think Rod Brind'Amour is a great coach who's worth probably a postseason series just because of the way he handles his team. So Carolina's been close. I think this is a year they have a good chance of taking that last step and getting to a Stanley Cup final and winning it.
Yeah, I mean, this team is super deep heading into the year. I mean, they didn't have Svechnikov for the playoffs last year, but they still kicked a lot of butt. You know, Aho, Marty Necas, Seth Jarvis, Tara Vinen, Kotkaniemi, Jordan Staal still kicking defensively. They're very tough, very stout. They just signed Dmitry Orlov over the summer. If they get average goaltending, which they have for most years, they're going to be a super tough out again this season. So I definitely understand that pick for sure. My pick, I'm going to start off with the Dallas Stars. I love them heading into this year. They have that perfect mix of young and veteran players. They can beat you in a variety of different ways. They can speed and skill you to death, but they can also play some heavy hockey as well. And Jamie Benn had a really good year last year. Tyler Seguin is still playing well. It's funny. Those players, while a bit older, they're still kicking, but it's the younger players who are better at this point. And man, did they get lucky with Jason Robertson and some of these other guys? It's crazy how they were kind of able to, I guess, retool on the fly while still having Ben and Seguin. And Robertson had an unreal year last year. I expect that to continue this year. Rupe Hintz is also incredible. Miro Heiskanen. Jake Ottinger is one of the best goalies in the league.
Yeah.
Pete DeBoer, usually his teams, I guess, get worse as his tenures go on, but this is still only his second year. I expect the Stars to be insanely good this year, a contender to win the Central and a contender to win the Stanley Cup. They are a very deep team, good defensively. I am very high on the Stars, so I'm going to start off with them for my fantasy team.
It's a great pick, and I think when you look at the Western Conference, I think Ottinger gives them a big edge over some very talented but more offensive-minded teams that are also going to be contenders in the West. So I think it's a great pick.
Yeah, I've been on the Stars bandwagon. I feel like for the last couple of years, they played really well last year, just couldn't get over the hump. But I think this year, this could be the year where they go even deeper into the playoffs. And I know they just went to the final a few years ago. They lost to the Lightning, but I could definitely see them getting back there because the West, it's kind of, I guess, wide open in some ways. You have Vegas, who obviously they're the defending champions. I'm sure one of us is going to pick them at some point in this draft. But after them, Dallas is right up there. You got Edmonton, obviously. I'm sure one of those will be picked as well. But they're one of the top 3 teams in the Western Conference right now.
No question about it. No question about it.
Who's your second team?
I'm sticking in the West. I'm going to go with the Colorado Avalanche. I think that, they're probably not going to have Landeskog again for most, if not all of this year. And that is why they weren't my first team. But it's hard to argue with the depth. I mean, you talk about Nathan McKinnon. You talk about just the way this team is put together. Their window, I think, still has another year or two where they're going to be considered an elite team. To me, the big question for them is goaltending. And is Georgiev the answer there? If he gives them above average goaltending, I think they can stay with just about anyone. I mean, you look at that blue line and Cale Makar, Devon Taves. They are deep. They are talented. They have guys who can move the puck, power play the quarterback to power play. And, they're not just going to beat you with their top line. They're going to go 3 lines deep where they can put the puck in the net, and they're experienced. They've won a Stanley Cup. They've won a couple of President's trophies with the core of this group. Again, Landeskog's absence is the only reason I sort of hesitate to make them my number 1 pick.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge loss again this year. And I really hope that he's able to return, hopefully somehow for the playoffs, if not next season after this one, because he changes that team in so many ways. But I thought the Avalanche had a really good offseason. I mean, they brought in Ryan Johansson. They signed Tomas Tatar. 2 really strong signings, in my opinion. They also brought in Jonathan Drouin, which I think should be interesting. Ross Colton, Chris McFarland, and Joe Sakic have done a really good job of making some changes to the team after they lost last year to the Kraken in the playoffs. Heck, even defensively, that top 4 of Makar, Taves, Byram, and Gerard is absolutely nasty. But I do agree with you overall. Their biggest question is goaltending. But forward-wise, they are really, really deep. And with Johansson, at least, he's not making $8 million compared to where he was in Nashville.
Right.
You have your second-line center for $4 million. You take that any day of the week. So
the capologist, that's like a bargain of all bargains. If the guy just gives you average production, and he could give you more than that, should give you more than that, $4 million for your second line center is a steal.
Yeah, they're not having to pay him nearly as much as Nashville is. My second team, I'm going to go out east. I'm going to go with the New Jersey Devils. I think the Devils are for real this year. Jack Hughes broke out in a big way last year. Nico Hischier is one of the top centers in the league, both offensively and defensively. They're super deep. They're great defensively. They get good goaltending. Vanacek is fine, but Schmidt, I think, is the guy that's probably going to be the number 1 at some point for the Devils. I was kind of thinking during the offseason they were going to be players for Connor Hellebuck. That did not happen, but they still are a super good team heading into the year. Tom Fitzgerald has done an incredible job with them. I mean, Dougie Hamilton on the back end. They still have John Marino there, obviously, but they got Palat, who is playing super well. They can roll 4 lines at you. They come at you with such speed and precision. It's hard to slow them down. And honestly, I thought they were kind of toast when they went down 0-2 to the Rangers, but they came back with a vengeance against them. And I think they're only going to be better this season.
They really are. They are still a team, on the upswing. You got to remember Jesper Bratt. He is a very, very capable player. Timo Meyer on that team. And then I guess, you talk about Luke Hughes also to add to the mix, a young player on the upswing who can provide some more offense once he gets a little more experience. I think the goaltending, like you said, is sort of the wild card because, you look at Vanacek. I like him. I don't love him in a playoff situation. And then, Schmid looked good at times last year, but wasn't as consistent. He could overtake Vanacek. I think you're right. But I think the Devils, maybe for the next 3 or 4 years, are going to be contenders in this league. And they're a team still on the upswing.
Right. I mean, And heck, they may not get to the final this year, but I do think they have a couple of Stanley Cup final berths or maybe even a championship at some point here down the line. Their window has just opened, and it's going to stay open for quite a long time. I think they're going to be a top 2 team in the Metropolitan Division this year. But that will do it for this first segment. Gil and I have 2 teams on our mock fantasy teams. We have 3 more to pick. We're going to pick more of them right after this. But before we get to that, we got to discuss FanDuel. Snap into action this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get on the action than right now. The app is so easy to use. There's a wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. That's FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NFL and Locked On. All right, we're back here on this Thursday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. There is this annoying fly in my office, and I don't know what the heck is going on with it, but I am Hunter Hodes, the host of Locked On Penguins. Joining me for today, a special guest for today, is Gil Martin of Locked On Islanders, who also hosts the Friday show with Rachel of Locked On Flyers, so you can catch that one on Friday. But Gil, who is your third team for your mock fantasy team?
I'm going to go conservative with this and take the defending Stanley Cup champions, the Vegas Golden Knights. I don't think their window is closed either. You talk about a team that was well put together, that, has been a contender really since they entered the league. And I like the way this team just is consistent. They're dangerous. And I don't think we've heard the last of them. We still haven't seen everything Jack Eichel can do if he can stay healthy. The goaltending, again, is sort of the question as far as, is Adin Hill going to be as good as he was last year in the playoffs? Logan Thompson, is he the answer? But overall, you look, at the names on this team, your Barbashevs and your Eichels, and this team is deep. This team comes at you with 4 lines and they just wear you down. And I think in the playoffs in particular, that is a very effective way to play.
I agree. And you're right on Adin Hill, especially. Is he going to be a consistent goaltender, or is he going to turn back into a pumpkin or a journeyman goalie? Because let's face it, he got a pretty nice contract extension for the Knights in a pretty small sample, but he's got to go out there and prove it during the regular season and in the playoffs again if the Knights do want to repeat. They come into the year super deep again. Stone is obviously incredible. Eichel had a great playoffs. Chandler Stevenson's really come into his own. You have 2 of the misfits, at least in March or so, and William Karlsson. Barbashev was signed to a really nice contract. They're still pretty deep at forward. And then when you can ice Pietrangelo and Theodore on 2 different pairings, you're doing something right. So they have a really strong shot at repeating. And also Bruce Cassidy is their head coach, one of the best head coaches in the league. They definitely have a great shot. My number 3 team, I was going back and forth on this one. I'm going to go with the Edmonton Oilers. Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, 2 of the 5 best players on the planet. McDavid, I think, is the best player on the planet. They're also a lot deeper this year compared to other years. Nugent Hopkins had a great year last year. Evander Kane is also playing at a high level. Defensively, they're not as good as some of these other teams, but they get the job done. And as long as you have McDavid and Draisaitl, you can do a lot of things. And heck, even their bottom 6 last year, they were able to score a lot more compared to other years. I expect the same this year from the Oilers. This is going to be a very tough out this year. So I have the Oilers as one of my contenders.
No, it's hard to argue with the Oilers. All the talent that they have on that team. And it's just, again, I think part of the problem the Oilers have had, you talk about defense, you talk about goaltending, it's also expectations and the pressure that goes along with having your McDavids and your Draisaitl's and when are we going to get that big win, because when you have the best player in the world on your roster, there's the expectation that in order to really cement that position, you got to win at least one Stanley Cup. So I think that's part of it. But to say that they're going to be dangerous no matter what, and they just have to get it together and get hot at the right time in the playoffs and get that goaltending.
I agree. And I know some people were surprised that Edmonton lost to Vegas in the playoffs, especially here. I was not. I actually picked Vegas to win that series because I thought they were one of the few teams in the league that can go blow for blow with them. Obviously it's hard to stop McDavid and Draisaitl and Nugent Hopkins and some of these other guys, but the Knights had the team to do it. The Kings, they had a good game plan, but you could only shut down McDavid and Draisaitl so long when you're kind of playing passive. The Knights weren't going to do that. So I wouldn't say the book is out on how to beat the Oilers, but I think heading into this year, they're improved. McDavid's going to be insane again. If they can get the goaltending, especially, they should be a top contender in the league this year.
Have to agree. And they're going to be a dangerous team. And even if they don't win, they're going to be a lot of fun to watch.
They're always fun to watch. I can watch Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl do stuff to other teams every night if I had to. But who is your fourth team?
If you're going Edmonton, I'm going Toronto.
Yeah.
So, that's sort of the Eastern Conference flip side or equivalent of the Edmonton Oilers. And, the thing about Toronto, and we all know they haven't won a Stanley Cup since 1967. And to say there's pressure on this organization and these players is an understatement. But there's going to be a lot of desperation because of the salary cap and the contract situation. They're not going to be able to keep their core four together probably beyond this year. I don't see how they are able to re-sign Nylander and just field a competitive team around this core. They're also the core guys are getting a little bit older as well. When you look at John Tavares is starting to get a little older, and it's time. They added Max Domi, they added Tyler Bertuzzi. I think those are solid pickups. Hard to argue with Austin Matthews. Your top two centers are Austin Matthews and John Tavares. Name me a team with a better top two centers than that. I guess the question that you always have to ask about them is the defense and the goaltending going to be good enough? Because they can outscore anybody.
Right. And I think now that they have that 19-year curse gone out of there, they can definitely play more free-willed this year anyway. That was eating at them heading into this last season. They finally were able to break that curse. And I know obviously what happened in the next round against the Panthers, but they were able to beat the Lightning. They won a round, but it's time to do more than that. You have the core in place. You signed all these players to go on deep runs. That hasn't happened yet. It's time to really start doing that, or else, maybe at some point, maybe the new manager group won't be as patient as the last one was with Kyle Dubas and company. Obviously, he's in Pittsburgh now with Jason Spezza, but hey, that's something to keep an eye on, of course, with the new manager group and how patient they'll be with this core group of players. My number 14 before we head to break, I'm going to take the defending Eastern Conference champions, the Florida Panthers. Yes, they do have some injuries to start the season, but this team is still insanely good when healthy. You got Sasha Barkov, who's one of the best two-way centers in the league. Matthew Tkachuk, who was just unreal last year, especially in the playoffs. It took a broken sternum for him to not even play in the Stanley Cup final, which is crazy that he was trying to play through it to begin with, to be honest. Verhaeghe has been such an underrated pickup for the Panthers. He's been great everywhere he's gone, but with the Panthers, he's been awesome. Sam Reinhart, heck, even Sam Bennett has played really well for the Panthers. I love the Evan Rodriguez signing that they made during the offseason. I thought he's been great with Pittsburgh. He was great in Colorado. He's going to do a really good job here with the Cats. Obviously, Montour, Ekblad. And then the biggest question, though, goaltending. What version of Sergei Bobrovsky are we going to get? Are you going to get the pumpkin version, or are we going to get the playoff version, who was one of the best goaltenders in hockey? Small sample sizes can be fickle. Goaltending is always voodoo. That's what I say, at least when it comes to goaltending. But they got to see what version of him they're going to get to see how far they're going to go. But I have the Panthers at the end of my team here. I think they're going to be a very tough out. And hey, I was down on the Paul Maurice hire. He's definitely getting a lot more out of this team than I thought he would. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think, last year they barely squeaked into the playoffs, but this was a team that made a lot of changes to their roster, and it took them a little time to gel and then to get healthy. They are dangerous, and they are talented, and they are deep. And would it shock you if they were able to get a lot more than expected out of Oliver Ekman-Larsson? I mean, they add him to the mix, and I think he could have a little bit of a bounce back year surrounded by the talent he's surrounded by, and based on the fact that there won't be as much pressure on him to produce as there was in his previous stops. So, even the depth that they add, I think, can be very dangerous.
I agree. I thought the Panthers had a pretty good offseason overall. Ekman-Larsson, I'm not really super high on, but they're also getting him for pretty cheap. So
exactly,
it's not going to be that big of a deal if he doesn't play well. I mean, they can probably just scratch him. For his last contract, it would be a problem because he was making all that money. But with this one, it's not going to be that much of an issue. They're just kind of, it's like a low risk, high
reward. Exactly.
Type situation there. And also, of course, Gil Spencer Knight coming back from the players assistant program. I want to see how he does with the Panthers this year as well. But I think that does it for this second segment. But to end the show, we're going to finish off our list of teams. Gil, I'm going to hand it over to you because you're going to have the final pick for the fifth team for this fantasy mock draft.
But first, we're going to talk about Indeed. When you're drafting your fantasy team, do you ever wish you could do the same thing with your business team? Well, if you're building a roster to win the league, you need Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with the right skills. You can get it all with Indeed. You can find top talent fast with Indeed's powerful suite of hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment that they list a job. So Indeed knows when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirements. So visit Indeed.com/lockedon to start hiring now. That's Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application pricing not available for everyone. Need to hire? You need Indeed. So my fifth and final pick, and the fifth one is always the hardest one because you gotta give it a little thought, and a lot of the other teams are sort of taken. I'm going to go with the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think they are, again, one of those teams where the window is starting to close. They've had a great run, 3 straight Stanley Cup finals, 2 of them where they won. Last year, some injuries, and I think the fact that they had been in 3 Stanley Cup finals kind of wore that team down a little bit. Tough to go against Vasilevsky in goal. He remains an elite goaltender. You theoretically still have Stamkos this year, although the contract negotiations may turn out to be a distraction. But, Kucherov, Point, there is still a lot of talent on this team. You still have Victor Hedman leading that defense. I think Tampa Bay is still a team to be considered if you're looking at Stanley Cup contenders.
It's interesting you still picked them despite the Vasilevsky injury, but knowing the Lightning, they'll probably still get through that stretch unscathed a little bit. They'll be in the race.
Exactly.
I think they do have to make a move at the goaltending position because I don't think Jonas Johansson is going to give them, 9-15, 9-20 goaltending. But now that I said that, he probably will because goaltending is so voodoo. But they still need another goalie there for the next couple of months until Andrei Vasilevsky comes back. But, again, they're like the bad penny. They always turn up. The Lightning are never out of anything. John Cooper's a great coach. You said it, their core group of players are very good. Defensively, they're strong. So I guess I shouldn't be that surprised that you would pick the Lightning for your final team. My
Yeah.
final team, go ahead.
And just one more thing. I mean, I think the Vasilevsky injury may even be a blessing in disguise, because if let's say he starts playing December 1st, and I'm just sort of making up that number. So he plays, instead of playing 60 games in the regular season, he plays 40.
Right.
He's not as exhausted when the playoffs come around. He's a little bit more rested. If he's going to miss time, October and November is the time that you would want him to miss, and maybe he's a little fresher come playoff time.
Exactly. I do agree with that. If you wanted to get an injury out of the way, you would want to do it now, compared to, say, this happens in December, Gil, and then he has to miss January and February, especially when, the second half of the season begins, or God forbid this happened in February, and then you have to miss the rest of the regular season. That would have been pretty bad for the Lightning. But you're right. It's if it were to happen, this is probably the best time for it to happen. But my final team for my fantasy mock team for our group of contenders, I hate saying it, but I'm going to go with the New York Rangers to round out my list. I really like them heading into the year. I don't think they're a top tier contender, but I do think they're at the bottom, I think, of teams that still could contend this year. Offensively, they're very potent. Artemi Panarin's awesome. Mika Zibanejad is very good. Adam Fox is one of the 3 best defensemen on the planet. They also have Igor Shesterkin in net, who is one of the 2 to 3 best goalies on the planet. But they have Vinny Trocheck as like a good middle 6 forward. The biggest thing with them, though, from obviously Chris Kreider, 40, 50 goal scorer. Biggest thing, though, for me, how are their kids going to play this year? It's time for, I think, Alexei Lafreniere to show why he was the number 1 pick in the NHL draft. Capo Caco, he's shown flashes. It's time for him to show why he was also a top pick in an NHL draft. And then Philip Hedl, I think he's the best of those 3. It's time for him, I think, to show a bit more as well. They signed Blake Wheeler over the offseason at such a cheap cap hit. It could be, again, it's like a low risk, high reward thing there. If he gets back to the level that we've seen him play at Winnipeg a couple of years ago, that could be a very beneficial signing for the Rangers. Peter Laviolette, while I don't think he's that good of a coach, he usually gets more out of his teams in the first year than he does in future years. That's kind of the same with Peter DeBoer in a way, but I still like this team heading into the year. They are a bona fide playoff team. And I think, again, they're not one of my top tier contenders, but they're one of those teams that can still, if things go right for them, they can go on a run to, a conference final, Stanley Cup and all that. But that is my 5th team for my fantasy mock draft.
It's a good pick. I mean, Shesterkin, one of the elite goalies in the league. And, you mentioned the 3 younger players. They don't have to be elite. If they can just be consistently good, there's enough talent around them, guys, who you mentioned before. And then I guess the other wild card to me is Kreider, because one year he'll put in 40, 50, and one year he'll be invisible for long stretches of time, or frustrated for long stretches of time. If you can get 35 plus goals out of Kreider and the kids are just consistently good, not great, and you got Shesterkin, I could see where the Rangers could be dangerous.
Absolutely. And the Metro is obviously going to be pretty crazy this year. But, Gil and I want to hear from you. Which team do you think is the best? Do you prefer my team, or do you prefer Gil's team? Let us know in the comments. You can also let us know on social media and all that good stuff. But I think that will do it for this Thursday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast. Thank you all so much for listening to / watching this one. Gil will be back on Friday with Rachel of Locked On Flyers for the usual show there. And then Jay will be back with me next week. Again, he had a couple things come up on Thursday. So we'll be back next week. Again, thank you all so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all for the next one.